Well, welcome to the inaugural video of this channel. By way of introductions here, I suppose. Nick Brazing is the channel. That is me. The topic of this channel is what the Bible has to say about slavery. So I thought for the very first guest, there is no better person to have than the guy that literally wrote the book on the subject. 2 books. Unfortunately, his second edition I have in electronic format, and so I can't.
I'll get you a physical copy.
You.
Of all the people in the world that that need the physical copy.
Well, actually, I really like the electronic version because you can search on it. And
That's
so
true.
unless you have the whole book memorized, which is impossible considering how many pages is it? 700 volume 2?
Yeah, 703.
703. Yeah, it's a lot of information. So I am.
There's a lot of stupidity out there, Nick.
Yes, I know, which is why I got interested in it. Oddly enough, I kept hearing this issue brought up in just about anything I listened to, and there are 2 complete sides to it, as you well know. And I could not figure out where the middle ground was, because there's usually a middle ground is where things lie. And so I just decided, well, I was going to start digging into it for myself and just learn it myself, not knowing quite how deep that rabbit hole went. And so here I sit, I don't know how many years later, how many books later, how many videos later, how many discussions later. But I am completely self-educated, so I learn from people like you, Josh. So why don't you take a second, and for those of you that may not know who Dr. Josh Bowen is, Josh.
Yeah, and thank you for it's an honor to be the first person on the show. That's it feels pretty cool. I'm Joshua Bowen. I got my PhD from Johns Hopkins University in Ancient Near Eastern Studies. So I'm an Assyriologist. So I study the languages and cultures of ancient Iraq and Syria. But because I have a master's of theology, like 126 semester hour, a monster of a THM that was in Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, and I do so much stuff with the Hebrew Bible. I got a minor in my doctoral work in Hebrew Bible. I studied with Kyle McCarter and Ted Lewis and a little bit with Barry Gitlin. But yeah, so I feel like I bring all of that to bear here in the online sphere on more than I would like on the topic of slavery, because
you are the beard of knowledge when it comes to the subject.
I just Nick and I were talking beforehand about how I was just at the Society of Biblical Literature conference, and there was a panel that I went to on slavery, and just one of the papers, I mean it really was, it was just an apologetics paper. It's really all that it was
on this subject.
On this subject, yeah. And so there is a need. I mean, there is a need. It's an academic conference.
I would agree. So I would agree with that. And the video that we'll be listening to and talking about today, I thought was a really good summary of a lot of the common apologetics on this issue, taken a little bit to the extreme. So in some ways, it's a little bit of a low-hanging fruit. No offense to the video's creator. None meant, but I thought it was a good example. It hit a lot of the highlights, and so it might be a good video for those that listen to this topic, that might hear these things a lot, to get a little bit of a background and the scholarship that goes along with this topic. So it's not too terribly long, but there is a lot to get through. I think in my estimation, it really seems to come down to a couple of verses, and everything else he refers back to those and goes, I know this sounds like it says this, which it does, but it can't mean that.
Right.
Because remember these two verses we talked about earlier that mean this. So it all kind of goes back to Exodus 21:16 and Deuteronomy. And so I thought we'd go through the lead up to that, but I thought what we would start with is just the title of the video, which is, what does the Bible say about slavery? It abolishes slavery from the beginning. I think it's from the beginning, from the start. So, Dr. Josh, does the Bible abolish slavery from the start? I guess would be a good starting point.
I mean, I don't think so. I don't know an academic that would say so. I think when
abolish seems like a very strong word, and he's got it all in caps, so he feels very strongly about this.
I mean, I think you'd be very hard pressed to say has a negative view, like a negative moral view. I think that would be difficult. I think the most that you could say about slavery in the Hebrew Bible, as far as their attitudes about it, is you don't want to be a slave, right?
Right.
But I mean, that's the same way you don't want to be in debt to somebody. They would put it in the same category. You don't want to be in debt. You don't want to be poor. And you don't want to, sorry, I'm going to silence my thing here. And you don't want to, I'm going to figure out how to silence it. That is to alert. There we go. Yeah, you don't want to be poor. You don't want to be in debt to somebody. You don't want to have a bad crop year. And you don't want to be a slave. Like, these are, it's not that there's some moral, component attached to that necessarily. It's just something you don't want, because it's, there are better ways to live, right? Better ways.
Right, and there are verses in the Bible, like the 2 Kings little story, where it says that my husband has died, and the lender is coming to take my 2 sons as a slave. Now, those were Hebrews, so it wasn't quite as bad for them. But even in that scenario, it wasn't something that she was going, "Oh, yay,
right?
He's coming to take my sons."
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think if you're trying to make the argument, as this individual in the video is, on, I think, what is just simply a misunderstanding of what's going on in the ancient world.
It seems to me that it's more taken as a fact of life, slavery, just like every other ancient Near Eastern nation at the time.
Yeah,
there's slavery. What are the rules around it going to be? And correct me if I'm wrong, but the rules in the Hebrew Bible are fairly consistent with other nations of the time, broadly speaking. Some maybe a little better, some maybe a little worse.
Yeah. Given the data that we have, I mean, that's
right. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, we have to deal with questions in the second edition. I, talk about what are these law collections and what can we say about how things operated on the ground. And that's all very debated. People can read Bruce Wells more recently, also Raymond Westbrook, Martha Roth. All these people talk about, what it is that we, how do we think that these law collections functioned? And that's, also true of the Hebrew Bible. But given the data that we have, if we're just looking at the law collections, like the laws of Hammurabi, laws of Eshnunna, laws of Lipit Ishtar, laws of Ornama, Middle Assyrian laws, whatever. And then we look at the laws in the Hebrew Bible, they're just on par. They're what we would expect. They're what we would expect.
The way I typically would try and phrase it is, people from another nation that came to Israel looked at the Israeli laws, would recognize them for the most part.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, they wouldn't, it wouldn't like be, it wouldn't like if we were to, it'd be like if we were to, I don't know, travel to Canada or something. And, when you took out a mortgage or something, you move to Canada, you take out a mortgage, and the mortgage company pays you to take out the mortgage.
Right.
Like, it wouldn't be like that, right? You'd be like, okay, yeah, so I've taken out a mortgage, and all right, I got to make payments. Maybe, in some cases the interest rates are a little lower, or maybe the monthly payments are a little higher, like
That's a
it's
good
just,
analogy, I think. Yeah.
yeah, but it's not like the mortgage company's paying you. It's not this sort of like radical, oh my gosh, like what's going on here?
The
So
unprecedented word that we hear all too often.
yes,
That laws are unprecedented, which I'm sure we'll get into when
unprecedented.
we get into the
Yeah,
video, which we
yeah,
probably should at some point, or this
yeah.
will be another 9 hour. 9
9 hours.
hours. So the intro is a little what we've already talked to. So as I was saying, it really, in my mind, comes down to a couple of verses. One of which is Exodus 21:16, which is the first one we'll hit, and then on to Deuteronomy on the runaway slaves. But here is his first entrance into the Hebrew, which I don't get the impression that he reads. I don't either. So, no judgment there, but Josh does. So the Eved, the word for slaves. Now he's starting with Leviticus 25:44 through 46. And I just like your thoughts on what he thinks it means. I agree with him on some of what he says, but I think he takes it a little far. So let's listen to what he has to say here.
What it says. Because the Bible, of course, wasn't written in English. It was written in Hebrew a long time ago. And the way it uses words is different than the way we use words. So when we read Leviticus 25:44, as for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves, we just assume there's some Hebrew word that means slave. And we assume that where the text said that, the translators just wrote slave in English for the Hebrew word that means slave. And that's what we assume, right? Except that's wrong. That doesn't exist. There is no Hebrew word that just means slave. Instead, the word is ebed. In English, it sounds like
I have to point out here that he did pronounce it correctly.
Well, he got the accent right. It's not
Right.
a hard B. It's a
not
soft B, but
that. It
it's
took
better.
me forever once I heard
better.
it took me forever once I heard it pronounced to stop pronouncing it incorrectly. So,
right. At least he didn't say like abade or abode or, so
yeah. Or I've heard people say abad, which is
right.
the etymology of it. But anyway, pronunciation, gold star.
EBED, ebed. I won't go into how to spell it in Hebrew right now, but just to stay focused, that word ebed appears about 800 times in the Old Testament.
Could you just pause it
and
for a second? So I don't like that. So I know from having studied and taught Hebrew now for 2 decades plus, like I can tell when somebody knows Hebrew.
Okay.
Right? He doesn't. Nobody that knows Hebrew would pronounce the word that's on the screen with a hard B, right? Unless it's a dialectical thing, which it's not for him. And even then, I don't know that there would be a hard B there. It's clearly spirantized, right? There's no dagesh in the bait. So, and you learn that week 3 studying Hebrew, right? It's part of learning the alphabet and the vowel pointing. So nobody's gonna, unless they're unless they're just making consistent mistakes. But that's a pretty big mistake to make. That word is pronounced eved, and you just, if you know Hebrew and you're keeping up with it at all. So for him to make this statement, like I'm not going to go into the spelling of Hebrew, it's feigning that he knows this language. And it's complicated. I'm just not going to go into it right now. Well, I call bullshit. Right? I call bullshit.
Okay.
That if he knows Hebrew, I'll eat my hat, as Megan would say. And that's a pretty big thing for me to do, to go out like that. But there are little cues.
All right. Well, I spoke too soon in saying he pronounced it correctly, and he had
it's definitely
the emphasis on the beginning was correct, but yeah, because it's alternately spelled in English with a V, So
Yeah,
Ebed
that's
or
right.
Eved. So in Hebrew, the pronunciation is probably a different phonetics.
I mean, I'll say this. If he does, in fact, know the Hebrew language, shame on him for pronouncing that Ebed with the hard B.
Okay.
Percent of the time it appears, it has nothing whatsoever to do with slavery, which should shock you because most people, again, see the word slave in the verse and they assume there's a Hebrew word that means slave and that's the word being used, except it's not, because Ebed doesn't mean slave. Ebed means one who serves. And you don't know what kind of service is being talked about unless you know who they're serving and how they're serving.
Okay,
Because that word
pause it
Ebed,
for a second. So I want to put this into linguistic context. Okay.
Okay.
This is the equivalent to saying, if you see the word run, you might assume that it means like somebody like running down the street. But it does, there is no word in English for someone running down the street, right? No, that only means running down the street. Because the word run can be in the millions and millions of times that it gets used in English writing, right? It can mean like water running or a nose running or a car running or like you would hear me say that if I were trying to make an argument that like Jackie Joyner Kersey were not sprinting down the track when it says Jackie Joyner Kersey ran in the race, that it must mean something like she was taking a light jog, right? Like you would
Right.
say that's a really stupid point to make, Josh. Yeah, of course words are polyvalent. Yeah, the word run can mean all kinds of things. It's the context that drives the meaning. Of course.
Exactly.
So this to me is just a smokescreen sort of argument.
Well, yeah, it's basically saying that it can mean a lot of different things, which it can, but one of those freaking things is slave.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And we're discussing those instances where
Yeah.
it means slave.
Yes.
The fact that it can mean, that Jesus was an Ebed at one time as well. Okay, but that's different than what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I hear that a lot because I mean, I see that a lot in what I do online, which is it's a mistranslation. And that's just one of those red flags where, somebody's watched a video where somebody said it's a mistranslation. Go to the KJV, for example. That's a better. They're bond servants. It's a mistranslation, as if all the translators on these editions didn't know Hebrew. I mean, one of the things it can mean is slave, and that's what we're here to talk about.
Yes.
It refers to Abraham, a rich man, serving his guests. He calls himself an Ebed. He is their servant. He is serving his guests. It's referred to workers serving, a boss on a job site. It refers to soldiers serving their commanding officer. It refers to court officials in a palace serving the king. It even refers in Isaiah to the Messiah, Jesus,
And it refers to slaves.
Yes.
Suffering servant, the suffering Ebed. So this word can mean anything from Messiah to a rich man to a soldier to a worker in a field and occasionally to a slave.
It can't.
The same word refers to
It's
all those
the way to
positions.
say that, and this might seem a little pedantic. It's not to say it can mean a rich man. It can mean a soldier. It can be applied to someone who is rich. It can be applied to someone who is a soldier. But the question that you need to ask yourself is, why is it, and this is not just in Hebrew, this is in Semitic in general. So you see this in Akkadian with the word wardum. Why is it that in the Amarna letters, the kings that are ruling, right, over their little territorial, their little areas, their cities in Canaan, why are they writing to the Pharaoh saying, "Your servant writes to you"? Right? Why do they say like 7 times I bow before, bow at your feet? Why do they say that? They're not the Pharaoh's slaves, right? In the sense that they're not like working in his house or working in his field. They're kings. So why would they call themselves Wardu. Why would they call themselves and use this imagery, use this metaphor, if you want to do it that way, to describe themselves as people that are subservient, right? People that are in this, utilizing this term that is used for the guy that is unpaid, that is owned as property, that's working in your field or, you know, working in the house. Like, why does he use this? And it's like, it's because you know, if we think of the Venn diagram, the meanings of these, or the usages of this term, like they overlap, right? And they overlap. There's a reason that he's applying it, is the point that I'm making. So yeah, like this is just a non-starter argument.
Okay. So how do you know what's being talked about when the same word describes it all? Again, it comes down to context. You have to know what's being described, who it's talking about, what the situation is, before you know what that word actually means. And so when we come into Leviticus 25 and we see that word, the translators have made a choice of what it means. And unfortunately, what they've chosen in a lot of translations is wrong.
I don't know if you want to comment on some translations that don't use the word slave here or not. It's tough to get into their minds.
Yeah. I mean,
is it wrong?
Well, again, I would just be very surprised if this young man knows this language. And if he doesn't know this language, and I would say doesn't know this language at a pretty, you know, high intermediate level, at least, it's a bold claim.
That's what I thought.
To say the translators got it wrong. So I think the thing to remember in any translation is that the translators are wrestling with at least two different things. One, what is the word? You know, very simply, what is the word that when they bring it out of Hebrew and bring it into English or whatever other language that, you know, that they're translating into? What is the word that most closely, you know, in both languages indicates the same
Right.
concept or the same?
And there's rarely a perfect one-to-one.
Right. The other thing that they have to consider is the word slave to one people group that speak English might mean something very different to another people group that speak English. Right? Their history, particularly their recent history here in the United States.
And it can change over time.
That's right. So they're going to factor those things in as well. So, like, there was a video that I can't remember who, but it might have been Tyndale, actually. It might have been Tyndale that put it out, where they were just sitting in like a round table talking about this issue. How do we translate Eved? And these are the things that are going through their heads. Like, okay, if we say slave, is the reader just going to import all of the things that they associate with the atrocities that they saw in readings or movies or, you know, documentaries or whatever about the antebellum South? Is that just what they're going to see? In the same way, to take it out of something contentious, you know, if you're reading through his stories about like Elijah, and, you know, or just the prophets in general, that, or any narrative that talks about a cake, right? Like, you know, make a cake for me, or make 2 cakes for me. To the 21st century listener, cake, you're probably picturing something that like has a couple layers, it's got icing on top, some candles, whatever, like a birthday cake, right? That's obviously not what they meant. So, you know, they might use something different now, like a roll. I don't know. That's not really a great, but it's close. So those are legitimate concerns to have. But where Kyle needs to go here is, if he's going to be true to this, now he needs to say, okay, we've established this truism in linguistics, right, that everybody knows. So thanks for pointing it out. That context drives meaning. Great.
Yes.
Like, thanks for pointing that out. That's awesome.
Captain Obvious.
Now you have to say, here is why the translation is wrong. Because in this context, given what's said about the individuals that are called Eved, right, or Evadim, it should not be slave. That's where he needs to go from here.
And I think that's where he tries to go from here. If I can throw one more point
Please.
here before we move on with this, it's a bad translation, which is essentially what he's saying. Well, no, it's not essentially. I think he flat out said it.
Yeah.
It's a mistranslation. So, Eved doesn't mean slave. I always tend to ask, so were the Hebrew slaves in Egypt? I guess not then. Were they just servants in Egypt, depending on the argument that's being made? And a lot of times I won't hear back from the person.
Right.
Sometimes I will. But then it opens the door to going, okay, well, why are they slaves in Egypt, but not here? And that is an interesting conversation for those that are willing to engage in it. It doesn't normally go very far, but it's an interesting, okay, so it doesn't mean slave. Well, that's the word that's used in the Bible to describe the Hebrews in Egypt. So why is it slave there and not here? That is a very difficult conversation to have.
Yes.
Not just because it violates my opinion or what we wanted to say, but because it violates the context of what the Bible itself says. Because Exodus and Deuteronomy make it so clear that slavery cannot exist in the scriptures. Exodus outlaws slavery in one verse. Exodus 21:16 says, whoever steals
so we're leaving. We're leaving Leviticus 25.
No, he does come back to it.
Okay.
But
it's been a little while since I watched this, so
he'll put it back up, but he replaces the word slave with servant in the verse, based on this reasoning that we're about to hear, which is Exodus 21:16 completely outlaws slavery.
To be clear, of what I was saying. And again, my memory's terrible, so I probably won't remember exactly where he went here, which is probably good. It feels like I'm seeing it in a lot of ways fresh. The way that you make this argument from an intellectually honest position is you say, what does this context, what's the constellation of characteristics? What are the diagnostic features that are used to describe a person who is called an Eved here in Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, or the broader context of 39 to 55, whatever you want to do. Not, okay, let's go to Exodus. Let's go to Deuteronomy. Now, given what we see there,
it can't.
Now let's keep those glasses on and let's go to Leviticus 25, right? That's not the intellectually honest way to do this.
I agree, but in the vein of bold statements, along with that's a mistranslation, we have Exodus 21:16 outlaws, flat out outlaws, no ifs, ands, or buts, slavery, period, and then moves on to buttress that with Deuteronomy. We'll get there.
And sells them, and anyone found in possession of them shall be put to death. Boom. In one sentence, God outlaws slavery.
Boom. Outlawed slavery. Does it outlaw slavery or does it outlaw kidnapping? And I don't know if you want to get into whether this is only a Hebrew or a foreigner or not, Josh. I tend to avoid that, but I'll leave that to you. I can acquiesce that yes, it's a broad condemnation of kidnapping overall, but to make the leap from because of that, therefore there can be no slavery, that's the jump he makes, one of many, that is just is too far, in my opinion. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, it's silly, right? It's illegal to kidnap people everywhere, like in the ancient Near East. This is like this, it's not, you're not allowed to go steal people. Like the example that I always use, and again, it's not like a perfect example, but a perfect analogy, but I think it's pretty damn close. Is that
Car.
you're not allowed to steal cars,
Yes.
but you can own a car. Like, you just have to acquire it. You have to buy it, whatever. You have to obtain it properly, legally. So, like, this argument always just baffles me because
Me as well. And it's so common.
so common. And so if you're going to make this argument, I think then you have to go, you either have to say there just wasn't slavery in the ancient Near East, which, I mean, you're already fighting an uphill battle with saying that Exodus 21:16 outlaws slavery. That's already an uphill battle among subject matter experts. But if you want to bite that bullet and say, all right, then there's just no slavery anywhere in the ancient Near East, I mean, okay, I don't know what you'd call it. People owning people as property, whatever title you want to give that, I guess, live your best life. But, or it does not follow from this.
The only way it would follow, number one, the only way it would follow is if every slave at the time had to be kidnapped to be a slave.
Right.
Then if it was a true no kidnapping, then there would be no slavery. But as we well know, there are many ways that don't involve kidnapping. I don't even think kidnapping cracks the top 3 ways to be made a slave. You could be captured in war. You could, debt. You could be born into it. I mean, none of those are kidnapping, but those lead to slavery. So this is the first big jump that he makes, which is because you can't kidnap somebody, therefore nobody can be a slave. It's just not true.
And I wonder if Kyle would argue that after 1807, there was no slavery in the American South because it was illegal to kidnap people then. Kidnap them and bring them in to the country. Like, I wonder if, I guess there's no slavery anymore.
And no car ownership either.
No car ownership.
No, I just think this is just his first jump too far. So Exodus 21:16 just flatly outlaws slavery.
Yeah.
Well, no, it doesn't. It outlaws kidnapping. And if kidnapping were the only way to become a slave, well, that's not even true. I mean, the Greeks, I mean, everybody had that law, as you so often point out, or a similar law. So let's see what else he has to say here. He does go on.
Whoever steals a person, whoever kidnaps a person, whoever sells them, whoever possesses this person who has been kidnapped and sold, any of those 3 shall be put to death.
And this is where he's going to go on to say this, but he goes, anybody that kidnaps a person shall be put to death. Anybody in possession of that kidnapped person shall be put to death. Anybody that sells that kidnapped person shall be put to death. And then he goes on a couple breaths later to say, so anybody that sells somebody shall be put to death, or anybody that buys somebody shall be put to death, or anybody that owns somebody shall be put to death. Yeah. And that leap, that chasm, that Grand Canyon of the leap of logic is something that I discussed with him when he first came across my radar online. And I spent a day and a half with him. I mean, it was not a short conversation, pointing these things out, and I got nowhere. So, but that's the leap he's about to make from kidnapping to anything. And it's rather subtle unless you know what to look for.
Yeah.
Exodus 21:16 makes slavery a capital offense. It makes it punishable by death. If you kidnap someone to make them a slave, if you sell someone as a slave, if you possess someone as a slave who's been kidnapped and sold, any of those 3 is a capital offense. You are put to death in biblical Israel. And as some people try to object to this, they say, well, it doesn't mean like to make someone a slave. It means stealing someone who's already a slave. except it doesn't mean that, because Genesis comes before Exodus, and in Genesis, Joseph tells us exactly what's happening here. This verse in Exodus, whoever steals a man and sells him, whoever steals a person and sells them, that word steals, Joseph in the Old Testament, in Genesis, uses that to talk about himself when his brothers sold him as a slave. When he was a free person.
I think we can skip past the Joseph story here just a little bit.
And I mean, and that's true. Like what he's saying is true. Like that's like, of course it's referring to stealing a free person and reducing them to the status of slave illegally. But I don't know how that helps him. I feel like that works against his position. Of course you can't do that. You can't do that anywhere.
Right.
Like, and the reader knows that. The reader of the biblical text knows that. That's why the story of Joseph, that's why it works. That's why it's like, that's why people, when they, you know, if he wants to stick with this whole Genesis comes before Exodus, I don't know what he means by that. Like, but anyway, if he just means that like the order of the books of the Bible come before, it's okay, fine, whatever. It's not the place to get into that. But that's why the reader isn't going, like sitting there scratching their head in Genesis 37 going, well, now, why are the brothers so bad? I don't understand. Like, what'd they do? I mean, all they did was, you know, sell him as a free person into slavery. Why is that such a big deal, right? Like,
I mean, Joseph, if the story were different, he could have gone voluntarily into it, and he still would have been an Eved.
Right. And why wouldn't he? Like, isn't slavery some great thing that, like, no, anyway, sorry. He hasn't made that argument. I shouldn't put that on him. He hasn't made that argument.
No. So
Yeah.
We'll skip forward to where he comes back.
Someone who has been kidnapped and forced to be a slave, you are put to death. So if you don't understand that verse and you try to read Leviticus 25, you read it wrong.
That I can completely agree with.
Because you read Leviticus 25 as if it's saying you can buy a slave.
Explain that to me, Nick. So what did you mean by that?
Well, he says if you misread Leviticus 21:16, if you misunderstand Exodus 21:16, you're going to misread Leviticus 25, which is exactly what he goes on to do.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
His misunderstanding of Exodus 21:16 to, well, they can't be slaves. I know it sounds like they're slaves, but they can't be because that's outlawed in Exodus 21:16.
I see. Yes, understood.
From a foreign nation, you can buy someone who's been forced to be a slave. You can buy someone for cash and possess them for cash. You can't, because
this is where he goes too far. Let me back it up a little bit. So I think I talked over it a tad. This is where he goes from not just a kidnapped person to it's anyone.
If it's saying you can buy a slave from a foreign nation, you can buy someone who's been forced to be a slave, you can buy someone for cash and possess them for cash, you can't, because Exodus 21:16 outlawed that.
Okay. That's the cast of the Grand Canyon that I was talking about. He jumps over from you can't kidnap somebody to you can't buy them, you can't own them, you can't sell them. Any slave. Let me
try to be gracious. Let me be charitable.
One of us
and see if I can read into what he said there when he used the word forced into slavery. If he is carrying the idea that if a person is in a foreign land and they are kidnapped by another foreigner, and if that's what he means by forced, and then that person, you know, let's say Frank, the Moabite, I don't know, you know, kidnaps Jim, the Moabite, who's a free person, makes him a slave, and then Frank brings Jim to Israel and says, got a slave for sale. Here's Jim. And then, you know, Israelite Tom, I know I'm using goofy, sorry, but, okay. You know, purchases Jim. Then that transaction, particularly if Tom knows that he's been kidnapped, is not allowed. That like, I don't think that's in the mind of the writer. in Leviticus 25. I don't think that's there. But
no, I don't either. But this is an example of what I was saying, where he goes from the particular kidnapped to the general force, because this is not the only instance that he does that. This theme carries through for the remainder of the video. It goes from you can't be kidnapped to the remainder of the video, if I remember correctly, is you can't be forced into slavery. And that's just flatly not true.
Yeah. If all he means by forced is like take out forced, right? Kidnapped.
Right.
Sure. Like but that's not a flex.
Well, I had this conversation with him with being born into slavery or war captives, and for children born into slavery, what was his argument? You know what? I don't remember. I shouldn't say. So I'll backtrack on that. But he moves from the particulars of kidnapping. We've heard him use that word. I'm not sure he uses it again, or if he does, it's sparingly, and it's forced for the most part. I'll probably end up being wrong here, but we'll see.
And yet that's exactly the assumption we make about Leviticus 25. We assume that's what it's talking about because we don't read Exodus first. If we did, we would know that's being outlawed. So Leviticus 25 cannot be talking about buying people who have been forced to be a slave. It cannot be talking about paying money in exchange for someone as property. It can't be talking about that because Exodus already outlawed it.
How did Exodus outlaw buying somebody for money? That's another argument he made in my discussion with him online, which is when it says, because I quoted him verses, whether the slave was born in my house or I bought it with my money. And he goes, well, that money wasn't paid for the slave. It was paid to the slave, because you couldn't pay somebody because of Exodus 21:16.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a nonsense statement. I mean, you can, there are absolutely people that go into debt. Let's say Tom goes into debt.
You could sell yourself. Certainly you could.
Right. If Tom goes into debt to Bob, he owes him 100 shekels of silver or something. Let's just say Tom can go to Jim and say, Jim, I'll sell myself to you as a slave for 100 shekels of silver so I can pay Bob his 100 shekels of silver. And so then, you get, all right, I hear 100 shekels. I mean, you're a very expensive slave. 100 shekels of silver, but you definitely can do that. But
absolutely,
I just don't understand.
But all of them, you couldn't because of Exodus 21:16.
Yeah, it's just a nonsense statement.
And to make the case even stronger that the Bible outlaws slavery, Deuteronomy 23:15-16 just makes it so clear. Deuteronomy 23:15-16 says, "You shall not give up to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you." Do you hear that? If someone is a slave and they're being and they've escaped from that servitude, you cannot return them.
Oh, wait. So the law says, if you have a slave, you get put to death. Then, and according to his lights, then it says, if you have a slave and he runs away, you can't return him to the master. Why aren't we putting the master to death for owning a slave?
We don't ask questions like that.
Oh, damn. Guess you could own slaves. Shit.
Because he'll get into, I think he touches on Exodus 21, 26-27 and things like that. If you beat your slave, you can't. You have to let them go free. Well, how can they own a slave? Shouldn't they already be put to death?
Yeah.
Now they only have to set them free, but they're not put to death unless they kill. So now he's on to Deuteronomy. This is the other leg to his two-legged stool here of slavery is abolished. In the Old Testament,
Yeah, I mean,
anybody can run away. Any slave can run away at any time for any reason.
Yeah, but I mean, Nick, this. I mean, all these arguments. Feel free to knock that one down if you want. I've been talking a lot.
This is the easiest one. I mean, Exodus 21:16. You can argue, who does it apply to? That's a valid, scholarly argument. I'm not sure how scholars, you could speak to that. I don't think there's been a poll taken on where they stand, but at best it's 50-50. It's probably more on the line of it's probably Hebrew, which we didn't even get into. We left that to the side.
Just as an aside, I suspect it's more along the lines of an earlier version of the law that's being redacted, the Septuagint, either the Vorlage for that the Septuagint translator was translating from, or the Septuagint itself is coming up to the law, and in light of Deuteronomy 15 is saying, wait a second, let me just add this sort of note back to Exodus 21:16 to make sure they understand. In the same way that you read through Isaiah and the Septuagint translator is saying, let me make sure I put a note back here in chapter 42 that says, like, Jacob, my servant, or, Israel, so that you know that the eved there, or the doulos, whatever word is used, that
yeah. So if I can take a second here for those of you that didn't quite follow that.
Sorry.
Exodus 21:16, the way it's written is, if you kidnap a person, I won't get into the Hebrew, but if you kidnap a person, then, whether he's caught with you or you've already sold him, you're to be put to death. So that's a general broad, just a person. Deuteronomy, what is it, 23:15-16?
No, in Deuteronomy 15, 12 to 18, I can't remember precisely. It's probably like verse 15 or something.
Okay, well, in Deuteronomy, there's a similar, or actually it's not similar, it's pretty much the exact same prohibition. But in Deuteronomy, it says, if you kidnap a fellow Hebrew, and then the rest of it goes on to be pretty much the same. It specifies Hebrew.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were talking, sorry, I've led you astray. Sorry, you're talking about Deuteronomy 24:7. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I switched from Exodus 21:16 to Deuteronomy, didn't I?
No. You were on the right track. I was thinking of something else. No, you're thinking of the parallel to Exodus 21:16.
No,
yes,
I was talking about Exodus 21, where I say it's no, that's right. Exodus 21:16. That's kidnapping. But by the time you get to Deuteronomy, it specifies it's only for a Hebrew, if you kidnap a fellow Hebrew. And then beyond that, if you go the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, done, before Christ, what was it, 400 BC, somewhere?
All that stuff is I think debated, and it's but like the old Greek might be in the.
It was done, not closer to the time that Exodus would have been written than closer to our time before Jesus. So when they translate Exodus 21:16, the Hebrew scholars of the time, of the day, way back then, they translated in the Septuagint into Greek, they translated Exodus 21:16 as, if you kidnap a fellow Hebrew, so that it would match the passage in Deuteronomy. That's what Josh is saying, is that,
the Greek, so the Hebrew, as you're saying, says that if anyone who steals a man, an ish, right, as you're saying, like, this means like somebody, the Greek, and if someone might steal someone from among the sons of Israel,
right,
is what it says. So when it translates it adds from among the sons of Israel to bring it in line with, and I'll look at just real quick, Deuteronomy 24:7. So if a man is caught kidnapping one, a brother, his brother from among the sons of Israel, or of the sons of Israel. So I think it's just, probably most scholars would say, just bringing it in line with Deuteronomy 24:7.
Right. So we didn't really get into that when we were talking about Exodus 21:16. It's a separate issue. It's a more complicated issue. So in my mind, you could just forget that and still say, okay, you couldn't kidnap anyone, and it's still not doing what he is saying it's doing. So I think we backtracked there, but we're on to Deuteronomy 23. and the runaway slaves. This, in my mind, is the easier argument to have because there aren't as many nuances to it. The scholarship, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the scholarship is fairly clear on what this means and who it applies to. So if you could spend a minute before we let him get into it to provide some background to the listeners, if you would.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way that it, and I get it, right? You read this in the English, you don't think about it too closely, and it does seem to mean, like, to a person that just reads it like that, oh, it just means if any slave runs away. There are some things that I think most subject matter experts would say, yeah, this most likely is referring to a foreign slave who is escaping from a foreign land into Israel. So some of the phrases that sort of tip off the scholars that he shall dwell with you in your midst, in a place that he so chooses. This is something that doesn't really fit well with a fellow Israelite. Israelites, if they're being set free, they're going back to their land, right? Their allotted portion. So it doesn't really fit. Also, we have pretty decent parallels with ancient Near Eastern treaties where, and of course, Deuteronomy is part of this genre. It's part of this. Israel's not supposed to have, is not supposed to be subservient in any way. They're supposed to be the head, not the tail. So over the other nations, they're supposed to be the ones that are in power over a suzerain vassal.
Right. So they shouldn't be entering into treaties. I mean,
that's right.
If I can say, most nations would have a treaty with the nations around them that says, hey, if one of my citizen slaves escapes to your nation,
yep,
you'll return him to mine, and we have a reciprocity agreement where the same thing happens to me, we'll return them to you. The Bible seems to be pretty clear that Israel was not to enter into treaties with surrounding nations, that they were to be the symbol, if you will, or the things that the perfection. They shouldn't let other nations tell them what they can and can't do. They're the ones that should be telling. And so there is no agreement between returning slaves, ours to yours or yours to ours. It's really not at its root, but part and parcel to a prohibition against entering into treaties with other nations regarding runaway slaves. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and it is interesting. The verbiage here, I think Sam Gringus is the one that pointed this out. I have to go back and look. But, the fact that it's not you're supposed to help him, the runaway slave. You're not supposed to bring him in and give him food and shelter. You're just supposed to take this sort of hands-off approach. Just wherever he wants to go, you just let him do his thing. Do not oppress him. But just, and I think probably the rationale for this, and I don't know if there's any consensus on this. These may just be more my musings than anything, but well, no, I think certainly Sam Gringus talked about this. Sorry, is that when you read, I'm doing sort of an edition of the Laws of Hammurabi at the moment, and as you read through the law, ancient Near Eastern law is very concerned in many places with, did you purchase that person illegally? Can you track the chain of of custody or the chain of purchase? Can you provide witnesses for when you engage in that transaction? When you paid the money, other witnesses? Do you have some type of documentation, some paper trail or some person trail that can show that it was a legitimate purchase? Can the seller also produce witnesses? How far can it go back? That sort of thing. But one of the things that you also see is that if a slave, there are lots of laws that are concerned about runaway slaves in the law collections. And usually what they're concerned about is if a slave runs away, and let's say they run away to my town, and here, slave Bob comes in, and citizen Jim sees him and takes him into his house. If he is found in his house and he doesn't bring him out when a herald comes around and says, "Hey, we're looking for this lost slave." It's as if he stole, Jim stole the slave Bob. And so
Okay.
like there's severe punishment for him. And so this very well may be, this whole hands-off approach may very well be in line with the reader knowing you don't take slaves into your house when they run away, because then it looks like you stole them, right? You're supposed to either bring them back to the master. You're supposed to bring, if you don't know who the master is and the slave won't tell you, you're supposed to bring it back to the palace, let the palace look into it, and then return it to the master. But you're not supposed to keep them in your house. So this very well may be just sort of making sure this whole above board, just let them live wherever they're going to live. So if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, you were harboring a runaway slave," nope, he's over there. I'm just not obligated to return him. I'm not obligated to help you find him. I just hands-off approach. That's what the law says.
Right. And the fact that it says in any of the towns, anywhere in Israel, where if it was, say, a Hebrew, he would have, a native Hebrew, he would have that land, he would have his city to return to. I know that's another reason people go, if it was talking about a Hebrew, it wouldn't use those words, that language. So, but what it doesn't mean, just to be clear, is that any slave in Israel. I mean, I tend to put it in my discussions this way. You're suggesting that an Israelite could go to another nation, spend 30 shekels of silver, which was not an insubstantial amount at the time. That was a big number, to buy a slave, bring him home, set him up in his little room or bed or wherever they slept, and the slave could just get up the next morning, walk next door, and be free. Where's the logic in that? And one of the other arguments, and I'm sure you hear it too, Josh, is if the master is abusive, if you don't treat them right, if you're not a good master, and you beat them, then they can just run away. Which is not what this verse is saying. It doesn't mention how they're being treated. It doesn't mention why they're running away. And in my experience, I don't know about yours, I hear this claim a lot. If you beat them, if you mistreat them, then they can just run away, as if just running away because you don't want to be a slave never enters their mind.
Right. Right. It's the reason people ran away.
Maybe my wife and kids that I had to leave behind and I will never see again unless they come on, visitation days. Maybe I just don't want to be a slave, and therefore I'll just go, even if he was the nicest master and never laid a finger on me. As if they needed a reason, like being beaten and being abused, to want to not be a slave. But again, I don't necessarily think he makes this claim, but I hear that a lot, as I'm sure you do as well.
Return them to the master. As soon as they leave that master, they are free from that master, and the law forbids you from ever sending them back. As soon as they escape, the law rewards them with their freedom. In other words, they are not the master's property. And this law is the exact opposite of every other ancient law code you can find. I've done the research into this, and every other ancient law code, whether it's in Egypt, in Babylonia, all over the ancient world, they all say that if a slave escapes, return them to the master, and in fact, you get paid a reward for returning the slave to the master. Only the Bible forbids that. Only the Bible says if someone escapes from the master, they're free. If the situation is bad enough for them to want to escape, as soon as they do escape, they're free, and you cannot return them. That person is free. They are not the property of the master. They are free. And the verse continues, that person who escaped, the slave, he shall dwell with you in your midst, in the place that he shall choose within one of your towns, wherever it suits him. You shall not oppress him. Do you hear what it's saying there? This escaped slave is not a lower class citizen. It's not, don't just throw them in the ghetto. No, they're a full person deserving of their own dignity and worth. They live where they want to live. They have full freedom. They can travel wherever they want. You shall not oppress them. They are not a lower class citizen, they are on the same level as you. You let them live among you. You do not oppress them. The Bible outlaws slavery from the start. Exodus 21:16 forbids you from forcing someone to be a slave against their will. It forbids buying people for money. It forbids possessing someone who has been sold for money or who has been forced to be a slave against their will. You do any of that, it's a death penalty. Deuteronomy 23:15-16 clarifies that if anyone
Yeah,
escapes
I
from
mean,
a master,
if
Yeah,
we could
this
just pause
summary
for a
here.
second, like this, I don't. This is why my comment was, this is just bad. Exodus 21:16 doesn't say anything about not forcing people to be slaves. Again, if all he means by that is not kidnapping them, sure, but that's a really misleading line.
Well, and that's why I say he goes from reading Exodus
Yeah.
21:16 and saying kidnapping in the right places to never using that word
Yeah.
again and making
Having
it
that,
broad for any reason.
like having those second and third bullet points, no selling people as slaves, like that's not what Exodus 21:16 says. It says don't sell
exactly.
kidnapped people, right? And not possessing people. What this is doing, just, I mean, I'm sure that it's clear to anybody watching. And certainly I know it's clear to you, Nick, but like the point of Exodus 20:16 is in good keeping with the rest of the ancient Near Eastern legal logic. And you can't have somebody say, like, being part of a scam, all right, so Bob's gonna go kidnap Frank, the free person, and he's gonna bring him and he's gonna sell him real fast to Tim. And Tim's gonna have him, and then the authorities, by the time they catch up to him, be like, whoa, I bought him. Like I got witnesses. It was like all legit. Of course it still wouldn't be legit because the witnesses, if they did their job. But and so the text is saying it doesn't matter. Right? It's making it so that you can't, and this is not uncommon at all in ancient Near Eastern legal mindset. So yeah, this is a really, really misleading slide.
And that's it was my point as well. I have I think written in my notes, this is the worst. I mean, this little summary here is where he started with Exodus 21:16 and then just goes across the gorge and says, and because of that, you can't force in any way anyone to be a slave, which of course you could by birth, through debt, through war. You could. You couldn't sell anyone as slaves. You couldn't own a slave. Well, then what's the purpose of the runaway slave law in Deuteronomy if you couldn't own a slave? What's Exodus 21:26-27? If you couldn't own a slave, what's the purpose of that? If it's being outlawed, a few verses before that. This just takes it way too far, which he's taken it further than almost anybody else that I've spoken to, and Deuteronomy 23 as well. These are the two legs to his wobbly stool on the Bible abolishing slavery.
Master, they're instantly free. They're not the property of that master. They don't belong to them. They are their own citizen. They are free. You do not oppress them. You let them live wherever they want. You do not return them back. Because of these two laws in Exodus and Deuteronomy, slavery is just outlawed. It's why you never see it in the Old Testament narratives. Read through the Old Testament sometime. You know what you will not find? You will not find a slave trader anywhere in Israel. You will not find a slave market anywhere in Israel. You will not find them forcing people to be slaves against their will and selling them in markets to other people. It just doesn't happen in Israel. It was everywhere in the ancient world. I mean, every ancient culture did this, and yet it is not present in biblical Israel. Why? Because God outlawed it directly. So when you take Exodus and Deuteronomy and you take them back into Leviticus 25, you realize that it's talking about the exact opposite of what we assume. Because the problem with Leviticus 25 is not what it says, it's what we assume about what it's saying. And if you remove all those wrongful assumptions, the passage loses all its offense. So when it says, as for your male and female slaves whom you may have, again, that word slaves is ebed, and it just means one who serves. You don't know whether it's talking about a slave or a servant or a soldier unless you know the context that it's appearing in. And I would argue that because of Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 23, it cannot mean slave in Leviticus 25. It just means one who serves. As for your male and female servants, whom you may have, you may hire male and female servants
Hire.
from among the nations that are around you.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
Well, it's not the word
You
hire.
can hire people to work for you from the nation.
Yeah,
that's one thing. It's not.
Yeah, he didn't highlight that, but he does note it. He's like, yeah, so they can't be slaves, so they're just hired. Why can't they be slaves? Exodus 21:16.
That's all right. Let's say if we want to, I'd be interested to just hear the whole thing,
Yeah,
and then we can
I'll let him keep going, because he gets down to the next verse where their property, and he goes, "Ooh, that sounds bad," but it can't mean that.
Obviously.
Exodus 21:16.
From the nations around you. Okay, where's the offense? You can hire people to serve, one who serves. You can hire servants from the nations around you. You may also hire from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans who are with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your, there's a troublesome word. They may be your property. What does that mean? Leviticus 25:45. It says, okay, they may be your property. They've been born in your land. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. Sounds harsh, right? Sounds like slavery, right?
Yes.
Except it can't be because of the verses we just talked about. Again, this is the unfortunate side effect of translators making assumptions about a text rather than reflecting just what the raw reality of the text is. When it says you may inherit them as a possession forever, we think automatically, okay, they're a slave, they can't leave, they're forced to stay with you forever. That's what we assume. Except Deuteronomy 23:15-16 makes that impossible. Deuteronomy 23:15-16 says they can leave whenever they want. And as soon as they leave, they are free. You can never get them back. So it means if you want to keep your workforce, you treat them well, because if you treat them poorly and they leave, you have lost them forever. You do not ever get them back. They are their own free person. They are just as free to leave you as a modern day employee is to leave a modern day boss. It means people are never your property. So when it says that someone in Leviticus 25, when it says you can bequeath them to inherit as a possession forever, what it means is they can keep working for your family even after you die. It doesn't mean you own them forever, because Deuteronomy 23 makes that impossible. They can leave whenever they like. It just means that if they're working for your dad and your dad dies, they can keep working for you after your dad dies if they want to.
Why not?
You can't force them to work for you. If they want to leave, they have every right to, based on Deuteronomy 23. But if they want to stay for your family, yes, they can work for your father, and after he dies, the work contract can continue to apply to you. Again, there's nothing offensive about that. It's what we do today. If you're working for a company and it's owned by a boss and that boss dies and now his son takes over, you still work for the son. That's what Leviticus 25 is talking about. It doesn't mean you are a slave and you can never leave. It just means your work contract continues. So again, once you understand the context of Exodus 21,
yeah, because Leviticus talks about them entering into contracts, so your contract just extends. Because
does he just not deal with the word property?
No, he's getting ready to. You want to keep going?
Okay, yeah.
Well, no, actually, he doesn't. He just says it can't mean property and it can't mean forever, because
what does it mean?
No, what he's getting ready to go into is where it says buy. Well, that can't mean buy, because why? God. Exodus 21:16, Deuteronomy 23. So what it really means is hire, which is what he's saying now. So I'll let him run out.
21:16 and Deuteronomy 23:15-16. It removes all the offense of Leviticus 25. They're not slaves. They are servants being hired directly. But by the way, let me emphasize that too. When it says, as for your male and female servants, ebed, whom you may have, where it says you may buy them from among the nations around you, that word buy is the same word as hire. It means you're paying the servants themselves to come work for you. It doesn't mean you're paying a slave trader to buy them as property, because again, Exodus 21:16 outlaws that. You cannot do that in Israel. You cannot pay someone for money, or pay money for someone to possess them as property. If you do that, it is a capital offense and you will be put to death under Exodus 21:16.
So you can't buy a slave. you can't pay someone else to buy a slave, even though it talks about going out and buying slaves from the nations around you.
And
Because
it's not
actually,
the word hire.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to get into achuza for property and
I mean,
hire
I think the thing
in
to
the Hebrew.
do, I mean, I think the thing to do here is just refer him back to, to
Where to
the
start?
context, starting in verse 39. So here, let me share my screen. I'm looking at the time here. Actually, I'm gonna have to pull it up. Now, you know what? This is sorry, I was gonna pull up the Hebrew, but I think that's just gonna be more confusing. So I'll read it. So
You want to go back
yeah,
to property and then to hire, sort of catching it in order.
So yeah, I mean, I think the thing to remember here in this context, if we're talking, so the word property is achuza. It's the Hebrew word achuza, and again, I would just refer. I've forgotten his name, but I would just refer the gentleman to read any lexicon. Look at any lexicon. Look at the Hollot or BDB or Klein's. Has a new dictionary out. Gesenius has a new edition of his English Hebrew lexicon. Or pick up any commentary, any reputable commentary on this, and just look at what the word achuzah means. And it's the same word that's in. This is the only place that it applies to a person.
Right, and he does make that point. He does make the point somewhere in here that it's the same word that applies to the land that the Hebrews are getting as a possession, because they don't own it; God owns it. So he does make somewhere. I think it must be coming up. Maybe he does get into it.
Sure,
he does make that point.
I don't know how. I mean, I don't know how he knows that and still makes this argument. Then,
I know.
Because okay, let's think about let's read Leviticus 25:39-43. So here, I'll just read it out the NASB. But and if a countryman of yours becomes so poor with regard to you that he sells himself to you, you shall not subject him to a slave service. This is a fellow Israelite. He shall be with you as a hired man. So this is the word sachir. It comes from the root sachar, which means to hire somebody, right? To pay the money to do a job, to do work. So here, Leviticus 25:39-43 says, if an Israelite sells himself to you, you can't make him work as a slave. Whatever eved means, you can't make him do that. Instead, you have to pay him as a hired worker. So why in the world would the text say in 39-43, you can't treat him as an eved, instead you have to hire him, if eved means to hire him? It just doesn't make any sense. So then here in verse 40, if he were a sojourner with you, and he shall serve you until the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee is every 50th year, Nick, as you know, but just for the audience. And at the 50th year, it's a big reset button, according to Leviticus 25. Everybody goes back to their land. All debts are canceled. It's the Anduraru. It's in Akkadian. It's the for citizenry, all the debts get canceled and all the slaves go free that are citizens. He shall then go out from you, he and his sons with him, and shall go back to his family, that they may return to his achuzah.
Possession, land.
Yeah, his property, right? That of his forefathers. So the thing that stayed in his family.
Yes.
The land that stayed in his family. So you can sell your achuzah, but only temporarily. At the Jubilee, it reverts back.
And the Jubilee does not apply to foreigners.
That's right. It only applies to
Israelites.
Israelites.
Applies to Hebrews. So it's 39-43, as you're saying. This is discussing exactly what you've just laid out. So if you're an ancient Israelite and you're going, well, where do I get slaves then?
Yeah, that's right.
Starting at 44. If you want slaves, this is where you go to get them, and this is who they can be, and this is who they are.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, this is just this. Unfortunately, is just not a serious engagement with the text. It's an apologetic argument that is it's even for apologetic arguments, it's terrible hermeneutics. And I would hope that in a hermeneutics class, someone skilled in hermeneutics would say, okay, look, if you're going to make some theological argument, and try to say there's univocality in the text, maybe you can come at this from the angle that God knows that by the time Leviticus 25 rolls around, he's going to say, you can't treat fellow Israelites as slaves because they're my slaves. You have to treat them as hired workers. And then you can make some argument for the Israelites theologically. But there's a reason this is an issue. Right?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm looking. Kyle, these are not passages that evangelical scholars have not known about for all this time. They're not going, oh my God, Kyle just pointed out Exodus 21:6. That's something we never thought about.
Why have we been
before.
arguing about whether the Bible endorses or condones slavery all these years? It abolished it. We missed it all this time.
Yeah.
It's outlawed right there.
Right there.
No, it's not.
No,
it's just not. And I skipped over the beginning where, as I think you'll remember, he references Doug Wilson.
Yeah.
Which I think is the only name he mentioned. And if that's going to be his source, then maybe it's a little more understandable.
If we're being charitable, maybe he's saying Doug Wilson has brought this to the forefront, but I disagree with him wholeheartedly. Let us pray, Nick, that's what he's saying, that he disagrees with somebody like Doug Wilson wholeheartedly. But yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either.
So I'm looking at the clock.
Yeah, I am too. He does have one last.
Yeah, we can probably go a few more minutes.
He kind of summarizes it a little here. I don't know if there's anything to add.
So Leviticus 25 is not talking about that. It just means you can hire people from the nations around you. It means you can pay them to come work for you. Again, there's nothing offensive about.
So you're going to pay 30 shekels of silver for a slave, and then you're going to pay them while they work for you.
Paying someone to come work for you from a foreign nation. What's wrong with that? Nothing. So once you understand the context of these verses, again, all the offense of Leviticus 25 disappears. But the reason this is so contentious is that the raw words of Leviticus 25 in most English translations just make it sound like something much worse is happening. Unfortunately, translation always involves some level of interpretation. There's no such thing as a perfect translation from one language to another that only reflects the meaning of the original text and is not in some small way changed by the translators. It cannot happen. There is no perfect translation.
That I would agree with. I'm looking at my notes. I don't think he says anything more of value on his very end. He sort of wraps it up, as we probably need to as well. We've gone a little long.
I know I was a little hard on him in the beginning, and I don't want to take anything away from him. Let me be clear. If in fact he has studied Hebrew and he knows Hebrew, I'm really disappointed in him because that did not show in his analysis of the text and in the way that he engaged with the language, or at least arguments from the language. But if he has taken the time to study Hebrew or to learn Hebrew, that's great. I don't want to take that from him, but do better in the future, because you fooled me if you do know it. You fooled me if you know Hebrew.
Fair enough. And I will, along those same lines as well. As I said, I had a conversation online with him that spanned probably a day and a half, and it wasn't necessarily adversarial. We did not agree on these things that we've been discussing for the last hour, and he just kept going back to Exodus 21:16 and Deuteronomy 23, where it can't be that. And it didn't matter how I argued or what I said, then that meant something else too. So it's a shaky stool. Those two verses really, in 21:16, just from an overall apologetic standpoint, that's typically one of the things that we hear brought up at the forefront very early in the conversation.
Yeah.
Along with more current versions of chattel slavery, but that's off for another video.
I would encourage him, just as we close, like I would encourage him to steel man the argument from the other side. And what that's going to require is he's going to have to read some secondary literature. If he doesn't know Hebrew, that's okay, because I think there are good resources out there in the world of commentaries or people that are writing on these particular issues, like monographs on these issues. If he needs some recommendations, like, I'm very happy to give those. But he needs to go read some people in the field that are writing on this topic, and writing from a position of being a subject matter expert. And once he does, at least when he makes these videos, he will be engaging with what scholars are actually saying about these texts and the things that they are wrestling with. Like Bruce Wells, and I'll shut up, but Bruce Wells wrote a contribution to a Law and Ritual edited volume that I picked up when I was at SBL. And it's looking at what kind of slave is in Exodus 21:20-21. That's the whole point of the argument, or the whole point of the article. Is it a dead slave? Is it a chattel slave? Is it a pledge? Like, what are we looking at? And so, like, there are some things that academia are obviously still wrestling with, trying to like pinpoint and narrow down. Just as a spoiler, he says it's a debt slave. That's his conclusion. I happen to agree with Bruce because I think he's brilliant. And I'm sorry, I don't agree with him because he's brilliant. I agree with him, and I think he's brilliant. Because I think that's just where you have to go with the final form of the text. But yeah, just you're gonna have to read a little more broadly. I think it's just the long and short of it.
And I don't know if you would agree, but I would say start with the passage in Deuteronomy 23. There's much more agreement and clear cut on who that is referring to than possibly Exodus 21:16. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly speaking, I guess, my I don't know, my gut reaction to the things that he's reading, I mean, the things that he's saying, is for him to take a much bigger step back, and to actually look into the scholarship on Exodus 21 and Leviticus 25 in particular, and just start with the basics, because I think that if Deuteronomy 23 in this discussion, I think, is a little ancillary, and I think that it's something that he could get hung up on, that I think he need. I think there's a lot more basic ground, the foundational ground to build. You're absolutely right. If he were to go look at what scholars say about this,
I mean, as far as dipping your toe into the scholarship, this would be a more clear-cut case to do. As far as his argument goes, you're right. It's a little bit ancillary, because if Exodus 21:16 flat out abolished slavery, then what's the purpose and what's the need for Deuteronomy 23?
That's right. I mean, at best, let's say, at best, if Deuteronomy 23:15-16 is supposed to be this blanket statement about any slave that runs away, I mean, I think Ray Westbrook said it best, right? Like, it just the entirety of the economic system, that section of the economic system of slavery just falls apart.
It just collapses, right?
And it makes Deuteronomy 15 sort of very superfluous. It's like, why is it even in there, right? At best, again, what what it would be doing is not outlawing slavery. And again, this is, I don't think this is what it's doing at all. I think this is what the text means at all. But even if I were to like grant all of that, the most that it's going to do under his interpretation is make it so that you can't abuse your slave, right? Like, and that's, there's little different in Exodus 21, 20 to 20, and 26, 27, because a debt slave there, if you abuse them, I mean, granted, it is sort of a severe thing.
Severe, right?
Yeah, the way they calculate that, the way they measure that, is some pretty severe injury that takes place. But you know, the abuse results in the freedom of the slave, and that's like, I don't know. I think that it makes, at best, it makes a huge contradiction with the rest of the legal collections. Best case scenario, you've got a huge contradiction in the law.
Fair enough.
And I don't think the law is contradicting there. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for spending the time with us, Josh. It's much appreciated, your knowledge and your insights.
Well,
always enjoyable to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely. No, and I keep up the good work out there. Fighting the good fight. You are the bastion on X. You're holding down the fort. So I really appreciate you being out there.
I do what I can. I do enjoy it, and there are people out there that are truly, I know personally, are really interesting and sometimes a joy to talk to, and sometimes learn things as well. So I did have a somewhat frustrating but enjoyable conversation with Kyle. I don't really think we accomplished anything, which is why we're sitting here together right now, to add a little scholarship and put some flesh on the bone, as you will. So it's greatly appreciated.
Well, I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much, Josh. And until next time.